One of the first things I noticed when trying out Skyrim Special Edition was the fact that it performed so well. The frame rates seemed to be very high and there was absolutely no stuttering. It felt very stable and very smooth. A lot smoother than I remember Skyrim feeling back when I played it. However, of course, this could be a case of I've upgraded my machine and therefore my machine's just performing better, not necessarily the game. Now, my rig is not the best gaming rig out there, but it's not bad. I'll leave the specifications down below, but I've got two 980s in SLI and an i7 CPU. So it is pretty strong. So I decided that I would do a side-by-side comparison of Skyrim and Skyrim Special Edition without mods and on ultra settings on the same rig. And the results were very interesting. I found in general across the board, Skyrim Special Edition actually performed better than Skyrim, even though the Special Edition Ultra settings are actually higher than those for the normal game. Of course, it has higher quality textures, and it has a lot of other features like the dynamic depth of field, God rays, and a fair few other improvements as well. And yet, generally, it seems to be performing better in a lot of places than the original Skyrim on the same machine. So, looks better generally and performs better. However, there were some exceptions and other things that are worth noting. The first thing is that in certain places Skyrim did perform a little better. So inside the Bee and Barb Inn, for example, outside Bleak Falls Barrows, I actually found Skyrim performed better than the Skyrim Special Edition by a noticeable margin. However, what was interesting about those areas was the fact that those were places I got insanely high frame rates in the original Skyrim. I was getting like 150 FPS in the original Skyrim. This is not actually something I recommend anyway. You should probably cap Skyrim at 60 frames a second. It does have issues with the physics engine when you go over that with things like flying cows and you walk into inns and all of the items jump off the shelves. But in places, once I unlocked the frame rate, places where it went over 150 frames a second, Skyrim was performing slightly better than the Special Edition. But not enough that I would care, because the Special Edition was still running about 130 to 140 frames a second in those places, and of course did look better. But things got really interesting when I visited places that were bad performance on the original Skyrim game. Places like the Steppes in Whiterun, where it was actually quite difficult to keep your frame rate over 45 and 50 for me back when I was originally playing the game. This was an area that was notoriously bad for performance, and even on my current rig I was only getting just over 60 frames a second, and this is without mods. But in the Special Edition, I was managing to get 90 frames a second without any problems. The same was true in Riften, where I would get just over 60 frames a second on the original Skyrim, but be pushing the 100 frames a second with the Special Edition. And incredibly, in Markarth, an area where I always got terrible performance, Special Edition seemed to almost double the frame rate over the original game, which is a massive difference. And in the end, this is what is more important. Even though Skyrim Special Edition does seem to perform better than the original game overall, what is far more important is it performs better in those places where the frame rate was notoriously bad. This means your lowest frame rate is always going to be well over the 60 frames per second benchmark, if that's what you're aiming for, on a machine like mine. I mean, really, I didn't drop much below 90 at any point. It was consistently good the entire time. And of course, this is great news for two reasons. Firstly, if you were worried about running Skyrim Special Edition because you didn't think your machine could handle it, but it did handle Skyrim, you might want to go and try it, because there is a good chance you will actually find Special Edition performing better. The second reason this is good news is it makes me think we're going to be able to mod Skyrim Special Edition even more than we did Skyrim and keep it even more stable, which of course is great news. Oh, the third reason this is great news, of course, is it means higher frame rate in general. Of course, that should not be overlooked. Consistent frame rate is, to me, far more important than the highest end frame rate. Getting 180 frames a second in an inn and then dropping to 40 frames a second in a city is not good for me. If I can keep my frame rate in between 90 and 120, that is much better than a range of 50 to 180. So generally speaking, this is great news all round.